Great. All right. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kara Carmack, the Exhibitions and Public Programs Officer at the New York Studio School, and I'm honored to welcome you to our Spring 2023 Evening Lecture Series. We're thrilled to be able to host tonight's Artist Talk by Janet Alling. Before we begin, I would like to note that the New York Studio School Evening Lecture Series is free to the public, with support in part by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Additional funding is generously provided by the Robert Lehman Foundation, the Samuel H. Kress Foundation, and individual donors. Please consider making a donation to help keep our evening lecture series free by clicking on the support button on our homepage. Thanks to those of you joining us virtually and here on 8th Street. We'll reserve time at the end for Q&A with the audience. For those of you in the room, please raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you so our online audience can hear your question. For our Zoom audience, please submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Following the lecture, please join me and our guest downstairs in the clay room for light refreshments. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker this evening. Janet Alling received her BFA at Skidmore College and her MFA at Yale. Sensing both her affinity and difference with fellow students, she found her subject in flowers. She was eager to investigate their essence and power and redefine a category of painting regarded as decorative and conventional. She conceives of flower painting as an essential subject of contemporary art. Her works are included in collections around the world and has been reviewed by the New York Times, The Nation, and Arts Magazine. Her newly published book, Unanticipated, A Life in Art, tells her path to present day through text in over 275 images. And we're grateful at the New York Studio School, she's generously donated a copy. So please be sure to check it out in our library. Now, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Janet.
Thank you, Kara, for the introduction and for having invited me to present my artwork. I am grateful to Graham Nixon, whose dedication to the New York Studio School is remarkable, as this is a place which really carries on the tradition of painting, sculpture, and drawing, and it keeps all these art forms alive. And thanks to the technical team for setting this up, the PowerPoint. We all need them. And I hope this presentation encourages each of you to keep pursuing your goals despite adversities and seemingly impossible dreams. On the screen here is a self-portrait I did at Yale. I spent a whole semester doing self-portraits. And just to let you know, I did draw and paint the figure, not just flowers. It's not moving. Because that's there. What do I do, escape?
We'll just click here on the screen, make that go away. Okay. You should be good to press. Yep.
Okay. This is an early Mondrian grid painting. I'll begin by saying my number one goal was and is the balance of colors, shapes, and lines. I learned this aesthetic when writing a paper on an early Mondrian grid painting. This is from that period. It's not the exact painting I studied. But when I studied the reproduction of this, I concentrated on just the pinks. And suddenly they all came forward on the picture plane in my vision. And then I did the same with the ochres and then the blues. And what I noticed that each color was evenly dispersed and balanced across the picture plane, but when you look at it as a whole, they're all balanced and orchestrated to be a complete painting. My second goal was and is to paint significant paintings that match the importance of figure paintings, landscape, and still lifes. My work is difficult to categorize. Florals is not totally accurate because the paintings go beyond being flowers and plants. They have abstract forces and content, and they're not just pretty or beautiful. At Yale Art School, Alex Katz, Neil Welliver, and Philip Pearlstein were significant influences, and I chose to be a realist painter. 3 years later, I chose to dedicate my life's artwork to using flowers and plants as models. I started by wanting each painting to be a masterpiece. And I started with watercolors. Single roses or daffodils or irises. I'm getting ahead of myself. So this falls into starting out with portraits. Recently, when doing the book, I reorganized all my work into 3 categories: portraits, gardens, and patterns. And this was the starting out of the portraits. With the pigments, when I looked at the blossoms, I saw they didn't reflect light, they absorbed light. So I couldn't use academic methods to light and dark to create the form. So I pushed the pigment of the watercolor with water around to get a kind of substance. And yes, there's subtle lights and darks, but this is a result of what I was doing. And I worked with these watercolors for about 2.5 years. But I always intended to progress to oils and chose plants that lasted longer when I wanted to move into oils. And the first were rubber tree plants. It was almost like learning how to paint all over again, because when you observe the light that's always moving, the plant's moving, you have to get it down fast. If you don't get it down, you try again, you wipe it away. And I really worked a lot on this to finally come to completion. I also did, and these highlight marks and the dark marks are the actual forms that I saw. It was really close observation. The jade plants, the surfaces of the leaves were different than in the rubber tree plants. So I didn't try to impose a style, my style, signature of brushwork. Each plant and flower I did, I was informed by the plant, and I just thought of ways to not be accurate, but to get the life of the plant and the energy, and it's close to what I saw in each one. Another one was African violets. Yes, they are very darks, but this slide is a digital made from an old slide, so there's a little bit more green in the darks. And then after several years, well, actually a decade of painting mostly with greens and reds, I got bored with this limited palette. And so I went to the farmer's market looking for subject matter and saw all these summer annuals. And the Dusty Millers I adored, and the coxcomb, the red flower, I'd never seen anything like that before. And so I started painting very large paintings. This is 5'6" by 7 feet. And I did about 24 large paintings during the 1980s in of these summer annuals. This one is called Autumn, and it was done in 1984. The clouds were from my imagination or based on what I saw out my studio window. This one is partly sunny. I did not want to say partly cloudy. And the process of painting these is that I assembled and this was so contrary to friends of mine who did landscape and still life. You always paint the background first. That came last in my painting process. I would set up eye level the plants or flowers. First, the Dusty Miller. I did a contour drawing, setting up the motion and the basic structure of the composition. Then I'd paint them, and then I'd do the flowers, and then I would paint them, and then I would add the background, and I would contemplate what the background would be, what the cloud shapes would be, what the color would be, based on the first two stages in the process of painting. And then I would go back and forth from ground to figure to get the relationship between them. It's very shallow space, but that's what I do. Also, if you know plants, the Dusty Millers, which are the sage green plants, I really love having a different color to work with and a light to dark. They have fuzzy leaves, and I couldn't think of a way to paint the fuzziness of the leaf. So each painting, I experimented different ways, and some in the early ones, they were a thinner paint, less dramatic change of light and dark. And then the paint, I started getting thicker paint because I find that with white paint that it's a wonderful viscosity of painting white highlights on these leaves. Another one was, this is Apocalypse. And the titles of the paintings came to me as I was painting or in the process of looking, what did I do? And to me, this was the life energy of living plants, having a tough time. And it's like a sky overgrow of, some bombing or whatever disastrous thing that was happening. And this painting is about 60 inches by 80 inches. It's very large. It's kind of more spaced out. It achieves what I wanted to do. Some people may think it's moody because gray skies and everything, but I think there are painters in the past, Vermeer, his painting View of Delft that has the gray sky. And to me, that relates to those paintings in history. And this came at the end near the end of the series. It led to some very mysterious, wild ideas. And in pulling the painting together when I was doing the process, the comet came last. I just went in and did it, and I thought, well, okay. And that painting is 44 inches by 60 inches. Working in a time when mark making seems most important, it was told to me again and again that each stroke be technically definitive. I found this restricted me in a way that diminished my energy. So I was working to achieve a balance, not only with the colors and shape, but with the flow of my energy. Painting time was precious. I worked part-time or full-time jobs. So when I worked, I was intensely focusing on the models and the connection of mind, hand, and body. There was little time for warm-up. When working on the early portraits, I also was drawn to the colorful variegated coleus plants. This was the first of the patterns category. I wanted them to be real, not decorative, and each in its own environment. I also, all my life, wanted to be free. And so I set these up in the sky. I don't know, it's just, I guess that's what my psyche or something was saying. So these were an overview of all the different categories. And I'll now return to the portrait category, and most of my paintings are portraits because that's the type of plants or flowers that were available. I got into some, here are some more coleus. Yes, this is a 7-foot by 5-foot painting, and it's in the Transworld Florist Transworld, FTD, Florist Transworld Delivery Collection. And it kind of knocked a lot of people out, like Peter Sheldall. And he gave a very nice review of this. I was also trying not to be decorative, and this painting in real life, when I looked at it, I thought, oh, it's tipping over to the decorative, but when I see it now, it sold, so I haven't seen it for real. It's a smaller painting. It's only 30 inches square. And then this one is pink coleus, and this one's 54 by 60 inches. And this gets into looking in the inside. The stems were always very important, to have stems to show the structure of the plant. Now, here are, this is in the portrait gallery category too. And I got into some rather adventurous pictorial ideas. And these stem from the portraits of the 16th and 17th century in Northern Europe, which included a landscape in the background, frequently on one side of the picture plane, and drapery used as a transition from the figure to the background. These, for me, were over-contrived. They just feel, maybe it was the posture of the standing figure or something. So these two compositions that I have in this and the next one is playing with that idea. This is called Nightlife, developed step by step. The total was not anticipated. This was the view out my loft window on Broadway, and this is the NYU IMP residential building, but I made it black because this is a painting and this is an idea. And this, to me, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the weirdness of rural America coming to the city. Nature is going to take over. And this is a second one, and this one I call While the City Sleeps. And both of these are 40 inches by 50 inches. I grow many plants in my working living lofts. I now have over 100 potted plants. In New York City, 2 cacti plants grew to spread about 4 feet in diameter. And after about 5 years of growing, blossoms appeared. And looking at it, I thought, after all that time, I've got to paint them. And so this is a 50-inch square. I started by painting many small studies, and then I did about a half a dozen larger canvases. They were either 50 inches square or 40 by 50. And what was interesting to me as I painted them was that each of the fronds, which are the green, what in other plants are called leaves, they go at different angles. And this was fascinating to me. And then you looked at the needles, and they'd go in other angles. And it made me think of the musical term counterpoint, where there's something, this, and a balancing going on. I am really ignorant about counterpoint, but I know it exists, and this is my interpretation of it. And also it made me think of cubism, different angles of the subject, the model that they are, object that the cubists painted. And actually, I had invited Lois Dodd to visit my studio in New York, and she looked at the cactus paintings, and she said that Picasso had painted them in the 30s and 40s. I've never seen them. I would love to see what he, but if the 30s and 40s is after Cubism, so it's curious. And then came another, here was one of the first ones. In the background, I wanted them, the colors of browns from the earth. And I had seen a photograph of the Red Canyon Valley mountains, or whatever they were. And a friend of mine was visiting I think it was in Utah, and she brought back a catalog. So I was able to use some of the photographs to derive from them the backgrounds. And all the darks were all, I fit them into where the interstices were to balance with the foreground. Then came the planet series in the portrait category. And this was initiated by seeing the incredible full moon out my window. And I said, I got to paint that. And I had a delphinium, and I painted the moon. And a boyfriend that was living with me at the time suggested that I do the planets. And so I did a series with the Earth and orchids, Jupiter and a tiger lily, Mars and a red rose, and Venus and dancing lady orchid. These are all 66 inches tall by 28 inches wide. And so that brought me to the end of the 1980s, and in the 90s, I had to get a full-time job, and I worked at the Met Museum, and it was a huge transition. So what I did in the 90s, I have not included here, because I did have to cut down on the slides, so I said, okay, I won't show them. So we go to 1999, and I'm again looking at the flowers in the Union Square Market, and they had parrot tulips. I'd never seen parrot tulips before. And this is the cover of my new book. And the title is De Kooning's Palette. Because when I was painting the pinks and the light greens and the whites, and then there's blue, I said, my gosh, this is de Kooning's palette, because they're all in all his women series portraits, and they're also in Easter Monday Morning, which is in the Met, an abstract painting, which is in the Met collection. So I did more parrot tulips. And again, the parrot tulips, the colors would change so that they did create the sense of form. This one I call elated. I mean, these tulips, these plants, they just have so much energy that I really relate to. At one time, with all the movement in the fronds going on, I thought, oh, I'm doing a Rubens with all his horses, stumbling in or charging at each other. But I decided to name it Elated. And this one is called Family Portrait of Parrot Tulips. And these are 40 by 60. Okay. Then at the same time I was doing, then I did as portraits, a series of the 7 deadly sins. And this idea came through personal life. That was envy. Envy. This is anger. And I chose anger. I chose red. I chose colors that matched what the sin was in my mind. And red symbolizes many different things, but I chose red that symbolizes the anger of bulls charging the toreadors' red cloaks. These two are 40 by 60. This is lust. And then you have sloth. And this is greed. Now, greed, I had a hard time thinking up something. And then I thought, well, I'll fatten the tulips. And then I thought, well, pink, because in my childhood, I remember going to playlands and stuffing myself on pink cotton candy. So these kind of I had fun with. This is covetousness, the leaves coveting the blossoms as they are about to open. And this is pride. Also at the time, I was painting German bearded irises. And the color combinations in these were derived from Chinese ceramic vases displayed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So the title of this is White Bearded Irises Ming Black. I did another one with blue. And that's not, and this one is the balancing act, working with that. Then I did this, I used gold leaf on this back. In Yale, I had taken a calligraphy course, and we would view the medieval manuscripts, and the floral illustrations for me were as interesting as the calligraphy. And they use gold leaf. So sometime in the 1990s, I bought a small batch of sheets of gold leaf and copper leaf and just waited for a painting in process to come along that said, okay, I can use it now. And I had to wait quite a few years. And this is a diptych, and this is 60 inches by 72 inches. And this is copper leaf. This is called Medley of Irises, and this one is 64 inches by 94 inches. And I chose copper rather than gold because the color worked better with the painting. And it's like I try to use it as a color rather than as some glitzy thing. Then I lived here in New York City for 40 years, from 1965 to 2005. And I always worked part-time and full-time jobs to pay the bills. So in 2005, I moved to Providence, Rhode Island for financial reasons. And for 5 years in Rhode Island, I painted small paintings of potted spring flowers bought from catalogs. The local florist near me didn't offer the kind of flowers I liked. And after much inner debate, I began painting from photographs I'd taken at the Smith College spring flower shows. At first, they were small canvases. But in 2011, I started painting a second garden series of larger works. This one is 40 by 50. And this series is called Dark Matter series. They are sort of cosmic gardens. At the time, I was reading Lisa Randall's books on physics, the cosmos, dark matter, dark energy, and supersymmetry. I find these a rather strange series. The view is not zoomed in as other works, and the green tulips were new to me. They could be flowers on another planet. I was trying to understand supersymmetry by working with the asymmetrical balancing of colors and shapes. And so that's that series. Then I did some close-up garden views called, this series is called Garden Pleasures. And they were, all these photographs were just 4 by 6 inch photographs that I had taken and printed at CVS. So it was a very different process than working from real life, a totally different one. And I don't know if you can tell the difference, whether the, and I did see Spider Mums, and this one is Reluctant Poseurs. You know, they just were going, not ready to pose. Then then I did another short garden series based on photos I'd taken at the London Chelsea Garden Show. And it got very busy. So in 2016, I visited Monet's gardens and his home at Giverny, France, and viewed his Zolipon paintings at l'Orangerie in Paris. This led me to the Giverny Garden Series, where I loosened my brushstrokes and took poetic artistic license to invent the close-up landscapes relating to the photographs I took. Again, I worked from 4 by 6 photos, referring to them for details. The colors are somewhat muted, soft, and turned out to look somewhat like fresco murals. You have to see them in real life. And when I work, this was the last one of the series, and it got really funky. It was done the next year, and it got really funky. I think it was a tough year. The colors, but when I work in all these paintings, I paint, I go back and forth, so that to me, it has to read really well, come together from a distance. And by doing this, you painters know this, that you work close and far. But one of the criticisms in these is that when they get from far away, they look so specific. But when you get close up to them, they're very loosely painted. Now, some people have a problem with this. I don't. And I say in the book, it's not like everything in a painting is not like an atom. In an atom, you go down, 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 dig deep, further and further to find whatever. They're all perfect. They're all, smaller you get, they're perfect. Well, these are paintings, and they're not atoms, and you don't have to do it that way. So, and then the year 2019 brought me some new energy and changes. From a photograph I'd taken at the New York Botanical Gardens, I painted this lotus in a pond, and this brought me full circle. I had some very personal things happen starting in 2019, and everything was taking me back to where I had started, with plants with shiny leaves. And then after this lotus painting, I looked to patterned leaves and the coleus. And these were painted from real life. In July, halfway through the year, I found these coleus paintings at Whole Foods. And I went wild, and they were wild. I mean, look at this. I did several of this plant, and this one is called Push, with the lower right leaf pushing out. I always wanted to push out front, out of the picture frame. and stems to give it structure. I didn't want to go totally abstract, even though this is totally abstract. And I wanted to keep the earth related to the painting, to the plant. And I did adjustments. I did work to get a balance with all the different colors and the varied shapes. This is called interiors. This was a calmer one. And this is called From the Earth. And these all are 40 inches square. And they're aggressive in a certain way. And when we're all concerned about climate change, I can't help but think and realize that nature in many ways, how it's reacting to human endangerments. So what you've seen so far are oil paintings, but I did start with watercolors and painted them intermittently through the years. In 2021, I spent the year working only with watercolors of patterned leaves and completing over 100. They are small studies. This one is 10 inches by 14 inches. And I was figuring out how to technically approach their markings. I never took watercolor courses to learn standard techniques. I know they are highly constructed as Winslow Homers, but apparently not so much to my eye as Sargent. So this one is called Altogether. This one is called Dawning Caladium. This is a caladium plant. This is called Altogether. This one is a coleus called Point of View. This is 10 by 14 inches. And this one is 50 inches square called Territories Unknown. And I painted one by one. Each one is 12 inches by 16. And I painted them one by one and then decided to put them all together. It made sense. And so that was the culmination of the watercolors. And now we come to 2022, and I started a series of plants this is marble peperomia, and this is a variation of marble, getting back into the patterns and minimizing the colors. And this is a plant of pearls and jade. It's a pothos plant. They're not meant to go together, but I did this series of 16. And I have reworked the past 2 weeks, 5 of them, and they're better. And I have photos of them on my iPhone, but I don't think I can get them into here. But again, this brings me back to Mondrian. Now, this may be a stretch for you, but this is what goes on in my visual process of getting a balance of the colors and adding motion, movement, direction, and life to these. The one on the top row, the middle, and the one on the right stayed. And I have cards of the one on the right that I can hand out to anybody who wants to, postcards of anybody who wants one. So that's where I am now. And then I got tired of green. I had to get, it's always good to have variation. This is from Begonia Rex painting. This is, those others are 24 inches square. This one is 30 inches square, and it's called, which one is it? This one is called Flock. This one is 24 by 30. And this one is called Sage Blush. And they're very different than other things I've done. But this is, you always got to keep going forward and try different things. Because right from the beginning, I knew I didn't want to paint the same painting all my life. And that's what a lot of people do. It's linear. I'm cyclical. Plants are cyclical. And life changes all the time. And this could be very frustrating when I couldn't find plants to paint or anything. So that sums it up. Keep on painting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering if you could talk about your relationship with perfectionism, if that came up ever, in whatever way you'd like. Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's. I think I try not to use that word because each painting is different, and you try to achieve. I don't anticipate what's going on or going to happen in the painting as a whole. I work step by step, and to be perfect is only to be accurate to what I'm trying to do. I mean, they say diamonds are perfect because they're not flawed and all that. Well, that's a whole different, category. Paintings, to me, have to be live, and if your goal is perfection, you're limiting yourself to the possibilities of what you can do. So, and accuracy is only a small part of it. I mean, your whole training of drawing and color and paint and what you do with paint, when that comes together, then you know you're doing something right. It has nothing to do with perfection. So I avoid that word.
Could you say that again, that part about when it all comes together?
When you're painting, you reach a level where your hand, mind, body is really working. And some people call it flow, as you see the flow in the painting, but flow makes it sound as though suddenly it's easy, or it goes faster or something. But it's just a feeling you have when you're working on a painting, and you may be struggling, and even in struggling, you may see, okay, this is going, I'll go this way. And then you have it, and you're satisfied. You're doing. You may be surprising yourself, but it's a wonderful feeling. I've got satisfaction. Yeah.
What is your approach toward linearism? Because obviously you're beyond that point, I think at least. But leaves are, the real leaves are kind of, their linearity is kind of evident. So I would like to know what you think
Of the
this.
linear,
Yes, linearity.
the lines in the paintings,
Right.
the edges, like.
Uh-huh.
I had a artist friend, Arthur, who said, your edges, you got to work more on your edges. And I said, what do you mean? What's wrong with the edges? And so I happened to have a chance to go to Paris, and I went to the Louvre, and I looked at the edges of all the Manets and the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay, and I took notes, and I saw, these painters were fudging their edges. If it wasn't right, they'd go back and sharpen here and there, and yes, edges, but there's no one way to do it. And I think that's sort of what I was addressing when mark making is so important. And I mean, there's so many things you can do with a brush, so many different kinds of mark. And if you fall into, you know, the fashion or what's important in your time and you do well of it, go at it, go for it if you can do that. But I wanted to be free and explore. I mean, my paintings are an adventure. Each one is an adventure, and I have a wonderful time doing that. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
You know, you were just saying your paintings are an adventure, and I do think like formally, there's so much range. You know, more so than people who are purely abstract painters sometimes. But I ever wonder, like, is it ever a struggle? Do you ever have to tell yourself, like, in terms of your subject matter, like as a painter myself, I sometimes think like the grass is greener. It's hard for me to like accept what kind of painter I am and find variance within that. But I feel like you're so good at like, I've been painting plants for, you know, you've been painting plants for much of your career, yet you're able to explore formally all these different things. Do you have to fight an impulse that says I should be doing something entirely different, or you just you become more comfortable?
Actually, I don't. I knew this was a lifetime's work because there's so much going on in nature. You're never bored. You can always find something. Even in New York City, although there were times I was frustrated, I couldn't. But at one point in the 80s, I think, other artists were saying, you know, beauty's out. You've got, don't, you've got to, just don't do beauty, you know, and like, you know, and others saying painting is dead and what's wrong with beauty? You know, I'm still with aesthetics, you know, and there are all kinds of beauties and some of it is very strange. And that's okay. In nature, you can find so many things. And it's like, I admire the painters who go outdoors and paint landscapes outdoors, because I did that in school a few times. And you look at nature and, oh my God, you know, how can I do all that? And people come up with ways to do them. And nature is there, but they keep doing them and painting them, and they find different ways, or else they're struggling with the same painting. But no, it doesn't bother me. I'm really a plant person, and I want to stay. I'm human. I don't want to go to the moon or Mars. I want to keep this planet alive. And then I have had the thought that decades, hopefully millennia away, if my paintings still exist, people may be looking at them and saying, oh, those existed back then. You know, they may not last, except nature is the first to revive. You know, plants are some of the first things to revive in fires, forest fires and everything. The ferns come up and everything. So there's great strength in that. It's like the reading the book, the Prince. What's that name? Yes, yes. And he approaches a red rose, and he says, and who has one thorn, and he says, "Oh, you can't protect yourself with that one thorn." Well, they do, you know. And so, you know, life goes on. You've got your own strengths. You keep going. Yeah.
When you're working very large from life, could you describe your physical orientation to the model you're working from?
Oh, yes. I put them on piled stools and tables, eye level. So I'm looking straight at them. But within the picture plane, some plants are lower than others. So I paint what I see from my point of view, and my head moves, my eye moves. So I try to get some perspective in it. You can, oh, wait, no. See, I was looking down on this leaf and less down on the top leaf in the left-hand one. On that one, looking down in, and the others coming at eye level. I remember talking to Don Nice, a realist painter who had just done a painting of a standing soldier, and he said, "Oh, when I paint the top, the whole perspective goes different as you go down the figure." And so he painted that. It's what you see, perception. Does that help? Okay.
I have a question, Janet. Your work seems to kind of occupy this interesting space between pattern and decoration and hyperrealism or photorealism, and I wonder if you could talk about your position between those fields, and also if your work gets read within one or the other.
I did. How can I go back to the last slide?
The most recent work you've done?
Yeah. These bottom two, let's get them big.
There's the next to last.
Yeah. These are the latest paintings I did last year, and I thought they're portraits. They approach pattern through the light and dark and the changing colors, and yet they're a garden of themselves. So I'm thinking, is it coming together now? You know, and I don't know what I'm going to do. It depends on the plants I find, you know. I'd like them to come together. I think it's a challenge.
I'm curious about that red comet that you showed us in one of the paintings.
Yes.
And I think, as I recall, that was the only one where you had something like that. I was wondering if that was a special moment for you.
Yes, it was a unique time. I mean, it was a difficult time. And so I did one other painting about that time that I haven't included in this, that's called The Conductor. And it's a painting of Dusty Miller and red and green coleus moving around in the foreground, and a kind of orange ochre field in the interstices. And in the back, a whole spread of mountains. And an orange and blue sky. So, but with the Dusty Miller, there's one in the center that the back is to you. And so I call this painting The Conductor, because that is the conductor conducting the flower's music. And it was shown at York College, and I was walking around listening to what people were saying, and one they were trying to decide, you know, well, the mountains must be a train. You know, they didn't get the music part, but they had their own way of interpreting it. And I thought that was just wonderful. But no, the comet was unique. Yeah.
You were talking about painters who paint the same painting their whole life.
Yeah.
Who?
Well, it was a comment that I was talking with a fellow student at Yale, and he was painting this, you know, small studies of landscape, practically all the same. And his critic said, you know, keep doing it, keep doing it. And he said, oh yeah, it's like I got to paint the same painting all my life. You know, if you hit upon, and paint, also, I think some galleries suggest to artists that if something sells well, you know, do more of that. So that enters into it. But I won't name names.
I was wondering, hello again, what are you thinking about next? What is, you know, what's exciting you now? Or even if there are things on your sort of concept bucket list where you're like, okay, now I'm going to try this thing out, you know,
Yeah.
what's on your mind?
Well, I would love to paint large paintings again, but I don't think I can do that because I can't lift them. And so I'm doing, you know, 30-inch square and 24-inch square. And I like working with square paintings. Somehow it's very, very comfortable with that. But I am thinking of doing some some coleus this size, working with more colors and with this idea of movement and color balance, but getting more color in it. And pardon? Increasing the variety of colors. A different plant, but more color. Like coleus has more color. Pinks, reds, greens, and yellows, creams. Yeah. And hoping to bring it together, you know, garden, portrait, pattern.
Balance it like your personal brand, like study kind of like that.
Yeah, you know, 30 inches square. Also, as you know, art supplies have soared in price. And and I'm painting more paintings each year because I have a lot of time to paint, and it's been, touch wood, going pretty well. So I do more paintings and more supplies, and you know, you're on a budget. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Janet. I think we all look forward to seeing what you do next. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And if you're able, please join us downstairs in the clay room right behind our front desk for light refreshments. Thanks for coming.